The deadbolt snapped behind me. My suitcase landed sideways in the snow, spilling one of David's old sweaters across the white porch steps. Through the glass, 12 members of his family stood beneath the warm dining room lights. No one moved to help me. My mother-in-law, Evelyn, kept one hand on the lock. "This house belongs to the Rowan family," she said. "You stopped being family when my son died." The wind pushed snow against my bare ankles. I should have argued. Instead, I looked past her toward the orange survey stakes scattered beneath the pine trees. Then headlights swept across the yard. A black SUV stopped beside the gate. Attorney Helen Park stepped out holding a sealed folder. The older man beside her studied my face, then straightened sharply. "Major Rowan." Every voice inside the house stopped. Helen looked at Evelyn's hand on the lock. "Mrs. Rowan," she said, "did you just remove the legal trustee from her own property?" Evelyn turned toward the house behind her. For the first time that night, she looked uncertain. But to understand why she had thrown me into the snow and why that land had never been hers, we have to go back 3 days. 3 days earlier, the road into Rowan Ridge was still passable. Snow had begun falling before noon, soft at first, dusting the shoulders of Highway 2 as I drove north toward Kalispell. By the time the mountains came into view, the sky had turned the color of old steel. I had not been back to the house in 11 months. That was long enough for the place to feel familiar from a distance, and wrong the moment I reached the gate. The wooden sign David and I had hung together was still there. Rowan Ridge. But someone had painted the letters gold. I parked beside the barn and sat with both hands resting on the steering wheel. The engine ticked as it cooled. Through the windshield, I could see smoke rising from the stone chimney and yellow light moving behind the windows. David had been gone for 2 years. His family still held a memorial dinner every December, though lately it felt less like remembering him and more like deciding what should happen to everything he had left behind. I reached for the envelope on the passenger seat. Heavy cream paper, red legal seal, my name written across the front by Helen Park. I slipped it into the inside pocket of my coat before stepping outside. The first thing I noticed was the curtains. They had changed. David had chosen the old blue ones because he said they made winter light look warmer. Now the windows were covered with thick burgundy fabric tied back with gold cords. The second thing I noticed was the orange survey stake beside the driveway. Another stood near the tree line. Then another. I touched one with my glove. Fresh paint, new ribbon. The front door opened before I could pull it from the ground. Evelyn stood beneath the porch light wearing a cream sweater and David's grandmother's pearls. She did not hug me. "You're late," she said. "It's 4:40. Everyone else arrived before 4. Behind her, the house smelled of roasted turkey, cedar smoke, and the sweet wine Evelyn served only when she wanted people to believe everything was fine. Lucas appeared in the hallway carrying a champagne glass. "Well," he said, "the government finally released you." "I haven't worked for the government in years." He smiled as though I had confirmed the joke. Evelyn took my coat, but left my suitcase beside the door. "We put you in the small room upstairs," she said. That was David's office. It wasn't being used. I looked past her. The framed photograph from our wedding was gone from the mantel. In its place stood a silver picture of Evelyn between David and Lucas, taken years before I knew them. I said nothing. That had become my role in the Rowan family. Notice everything. Correct nothing. At dinner, Evelyn seated me at the far end of the table beside a man I had never met. He was in his 50s, clean-shaven, with an expensive watch and a leather portfolio resting against his chair. "This is Martin Shaw," Evelyn said. "He's helping us make some decisions about the property." Martin gave me a careful smile. "Beautiful land," he said. "A rare opportunity." Lucas raised his glass. "To finally doing something useful with it." I looked through the dining room window toward the dark slope beyond the barn. Orange ribbons moved between the pines. "What kind of decisions?" I asked. Evelyn carved the turkey without looking at me. "Family decisions." Martin opened his portfolio just enough for me to see the corner of a development map. Across the top, in large black letters, were the words, "Rowan Family Mountain Estate." The parcel number beneath them was wrong. I took a sip of water. Then I felt the sealed envelope pressing against my ribs. Martin Shaw closed the portfolio when he noticed me looking at it. The movement was small, almost polite. That made it more revealing. Evelyn continued carving the turkey as though no one had placed a resort proposal beside the cranberry sauce. "Martin's company has been interested in this ridge for years," she said. "They're prepared to make a generous offer." "For what?" I asked. "The northern acreage." Lucas leaned back in his chair. The part nobody uses. I looked toward the window again. Beyond the glass, the land disappeared beneath the early darkness, but I knew every slope hidden out there. The narrow creek below the pines, the granite shelf where deer crossed at dawn. The old service road David and I had cleared during our first summer in the house. The northern acreage was not unused. It protected the watershed, feeding 3 neighboring ranches. It also held the steepest ground on the property. Any serious construction there would require extensive grading and a new access road through the conservation corridor. I turned to Martin. "Who ordered the survey?" He glanced at Evelyn before answering. "My firm commissioned a preliminary boundary assessment. Based on whose authorization?" Evelyn set down the carving knife. "Claire, must everything become an interrogation?" I asked one question. "And I'm telling you this is being handled." Lucas gave a short laugh. "You spent your career moving paperwork around. Let the people who understand business deal with this." The table went quiet, though not because anyone objected. David's aunt lowered her eyes to her plate. His cousin took a long drink of wine. They had all heard some version of that sentence before. Claire worked behind a desk. Claire drew maps. Claire scheduled construction crews. Claire had never done anything that mattered outside an office. I had stopped correcting them years ago. There was no useful way to explain that some maps were drawn while mortars landed beyond concrete walls, or that the roads I had helped design had carried medical teams into places where ordinary infrastructure had collapsed. People heard engineer and imagined clean hands. I preferred to let them. Martin cleared his throat. "For clarity, Mrs. Rowan, my understanding is that the property transferred through your son's estate." Evelyn nodded immediately. David left everything to his family. The sentence entered the room with the confidence of something repeated often enough to feel true. I looked at her. "Did he?" Her fork stopped halfway to her plate. Lucas frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means David had different kinds of property." Evelyn smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You weren't here when his final papers were discussed." I felt the familiar pressure behind my ribs. Not pain. Memory. A fluorescent hospital corridor in Germany, my boots still carrying dust from another country, a military liaison speaking softly while I stared at an arrival board and calculated how many hours I had lost. I had reached Montana before David died, but not before Evelyn had decided that arriving late was the same as abandoning him. She had repeated that belief at the funeral, during the estate meeting, and every Christmas afterward. A wife should have been here. A good wife would have known. David needed family, not duty. The first time she said it, I had been too tired to answer. The 10th time, silence had become easier than reopening the wound. I placed my napkin beside my plate. I was present when David signed the documents that mattered. Evelyn's expression hardened. "Then you should remember that he wanted this house to remain in the Rowan family." There it was again. The Rowan family. A phrase shaped like a locked door. Martin looked from Evelyn to me. "Are you also a beneficiary, Mrs. Rowan?" Lucas answered for me. "She got David's insurance, more than enough." "I didn't ask about insurance," Martin said. Lucas's jaw tightened. I almost respected Martin for that. Almost. Before I could respond, Evelyn lifted her wine glass. "This is David's memorial dinner. We will not turn it into a legal argument." She raised the glass higher. "To David." Everyone followed. I did too. For a moment, the room softened. I saw him as he had been before illness, change the shape of his face. Standing on the back porch in a gray sweatshirt, holding 2 chipped coffee mugs. Laughing because I had measured the distance between fence posts 3 times. "You know," he had said, "most people just look at a fence and decide it's straight. Most people aren't responsible when it falls over." That sentence explains our entire marriage. He had never resented the part of me that needed to measure twice. He knew where it came from. David and I met at Fort Lewis 16 years earlier. He worked logistics for a civilian contractor. I had returned from my second deployment with a promotion, a commendation, and the conviction that neither meant very much. At night, I slept in 90-minute stretches. I sat facing restaurant doors. I could identify the sound of a dropped metal tray from 3 rooms away, but I could not stand in a crowded grocery aisle without calculating the nearest exit. David never asked me to become easier. On our 3rd date, he noticed me checking the lock twice. He did not tell me I was safe. He simply checked the windows. That was the kind of man he had been. Quiet enough to understand another person's silence. When my grandfather died, he left me the ridge outside Kalispell. Not because I was his favorite, He had never believed in favorites. He left it to me because I was the only grandchild who understood why he refused every development offer that came through his mailbox. The ridge held old-growth pines, a seasonal elk root, and the headwaters of Coldwater Creek. My grandfather wanted it protected after he was gone. Helen Park helped establish the Conservation Trust. I became the trustee and primary beneficiary. Years later, when David and I moved into the house, I granted him lifetime residential rights. It meant the home was his for as long as he lived. It did not mean he owned the land beneath it. David understood the distinction. He had insisted on it. "This was your grandfather's promise," he told me. "I don't want marriage to erase your name from it." I had loved him for many reasons. That sentence was one of them. After dinner, Evelyn directed everyone into the living room for dessert. I stayed behind to help gather the plates, mostly because I needed a reason not to follow. Martin remained at the table. He waited until Evelyn's footsteps faded, before lowering his voice. I was told all family interests had been resolved. They haven't. His eyes moved toward my coat hanging near the entrance. "Do you have an ownership interest?" "I have an interest in making sure no one sells land they cannot legally convey." That isn't an answer. It's the answer you should have asked for before putting surveyors on the property. He leaned back. For the first time, he looked less like a buyer and more like a man reviewing his own exposure. "Our title company is completing its review." "When?" "Monday." That survey was placed before the review was complete. It was preliminary. Those stakes cross a protected drainage easement. He stared at me. "How would you know that?" "I established it." The kitchen doorway creaked. Lucas stood there holding an empty glass. He had heard enough to be dangerous, but not enough to understand. "There it is," he said. Martin closed his portfolio. Lucas walked toward me. "You've been waiting for this, haven't you?" "For what?" "For a chance to interfere. I'm trying to prevent a fraudulent sale." His face changed at the word fraudulent. Not fear. Anger. "Mom has lived here for 2 years. She took care of David while you were gone, and now you come back once a year and act like you have authority over everyone." "I have never questioned what she did for him." "You should be thanking her." "I have." "Then sign the papers and let her move on." "What papers?" He looked toward the hallway. "A mistake." I followed his glance. Evelyn stood beside the staircase holding a thin black folder. She must have been listening too. Her voice was calm when she spoke. "Since we're discussing it, perhaps we should settle this tonight." She placed the folder on the dining table. Martin remained seated, but his shoulders became rigid. Evelyn opened the folder and turned it toward me. A pen rested across the signature line. The document was titled, "Release and Waiver of Surviving Spousal Claims." I read the first paragraph, then the second. It was not a harmless acknowledgement. It stated that Evelyn Rowan held lawful title to the house and surrounding land through David's estate. It also stated that I waived any present or future interest arising from marriage, occupancy, contribution, or inheritance. My signature would not transfer ownership. The trust prevented that. But it would create a document Evelyn could present as evidence that I recognized her claim. I looked at Martin. "Did your attorney draft this?" "No." His answer came quickly. Evelyn's lips tightened. "Our family attorney prepared it." "What's their name?" "That is not relevant. It's written on the document." There was no attorney's name. Only a mailing address in Helena and a space for notarization. I closed the folder. "I'm not signing this." Evelyn exhaled through her nose. "It protects everyone. It contains false statements. It confirms that David's property remained with his family. David's savings, vehicle, and personal belongings passed under his will. The land did not." Lucas struck the table with his palm. "Stop talking like he was a tenant. He had lifetime residential rights. This was his home." "Yes. You don't even hear how cold you sound." I looked at him. "It being his home does not make your mother the owner." Evelyn picked up the folder. "You always did reduce everything to technical language." "No. Technical language is what people call facts when they dislike the result." Martin shifted in his chair. "I think this meeting should pause until the title report is completed." Evelyn turned toward him. "You said the contract could be finalized this weekend." "I said it could be prepared." "You said there would be no problem." "I relied on the information provided." Lucas looked between them. "What information?" Martin did not answer. Evelyn closed the folder with more force than necessary. "You should leave, Martin." He stood and collected his portfolio. At the doorway, he paused beside me. "I'll contact you tomorrow." Evelyn heard him. "No, you will contact me." Martin looked at her hand gripping the folder. Then he left without responding. The front door closed. Wind pressed briefly against the house. Evelyn waited until the sound of his engine faded. Then she faced me. You embarrassed me in my own home. I looked around the dining room. David's chair was gone. My wedding photograph was gone. Even the curtains had been changed. But the floor beneath us was the same wide plank pine I had paid to restore after a winter pipe burst. I did not say any of that. I said, you invited a developer onto protected land. This family needs the money. Lucas needs the money. His face reddened. You have no idea what I need. I know you borrowed against your business twice. The room stilled. He glanced at Evelyn. She had not known. I had not intended to reveal it. Helen had discovered the liens during a routine review after the survey request appeared in county records. Lucas pointed at me. You investigated me? No. Your debts appeared in documents connected to this proposed sale. Evelyn turned toward him. You told me the business was stable. It will be once the land closes. The land isn't yours, I said. Lucas took a step toward me. That's what you want, isn't it? To keep controlling everything because David isn't here to stop you. The words hit harder than they should have. Not because they were true. Because a small part of me still believed David might have stopped all of this if I had been beside him sooner. Evelyn saw the hesitation. She always knew where the bruise was. She stepped closer. My son spent his final months in this house while you were overseas building roads for strangers. I kept my voice level. I returned before he died. After I called your command. I was already arranging emergency leave. He asked for you. I know. You were not here. I know. The second time came out quieter. Evelyn nodded as though I had confessed. That is why I will not let you come back now and tell us what David wanted. My fingers had gone cold despite the heat from the kitchen. For 2 years I had let that sentence end every disagreement. I had let grief become evidence. I had let guilt make decisions in my name. But the sealed envelope inside my coat had not been prepared because of grief. Helen had called me 6 days earlier. She had found a title search requested by Shaw Mountain Development. Attached to it was an unsigned seller's disclosure listing Evelyn as the sole owner of 286 acres. Helen had asked one question. Did you authorize this? When I said no, she told me Colonel Samuel Pierce was already scheduled to attend the county conservation meeting that weekend. Pierce had signed the trust amendment 11 years earlier, after reviewing the ridge's emergency access provisions. His involvement would not determine ownership, but it would establish that the conservation restrictions were known, recorded, and deliberate. Helen wanted to serve formal notice immediately. I asked her to wait. I told myself I wanted to speak to Evelyn privately. The truth was less generous. I still hoped she would stop before forcing me to choose between David's last request and my own dignity. That night, I carried my suitcase upstairs. David's former office smelled of cardboard and furniture polish. Lucas had stacked tax records against one wall and hunting equipment against another. On the desk, beneath a pile of catalogs, I found a framed photograph turned face down. It was the wedding picture missing from the mantel. I lifted it. David stood beside me beneath the old cedar arch near the creek. His tie was crooked. My hand rested against his chest. On the back, in his handwriting, were 6 words. Home is where neither of us disappears. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed. For a long time, I listened to Evelyn and Lucas speaking below me. Their voices rose and fell through the floorboards. I could not hear every word. Only fragments. Monday. Deposit. She has to sign. Then Evelyn said something clearly enough for me to understand. If Claire refuses, she can leave. I placed the photograph inside my suitcase. The following morning, snow covered the orange survey stakes almost to their ribbons. I was making coffee when Evelyn entered the kitchen. She was already dressed, pearls at her throat, black folder beneath her arm. She placed the document beside my mug. I'm giving you one more opportunity. No, you haven't read all of it. I read enough. You owe David's family peace. I looked at her. For years, I had mistaken peace for the absence of my own voice. I owe David's family honesty. Her eyes narrowed. Then be honest. You left him. The coffee machine clicked off. Outside, the wind drove snow against the windows. I thought of David checking the locks without making me ashamed of needing them checked. I thought of the promise he had asked me to make. Let Mom stay as long as she needs. He had not said, let her erase you. I pushed the document back across the counter. I will not sign. Evelyn stared at the paper between us. Then she said, very softly, "By tonight you will." By 6 that evening, the storm had erased the road beyond the gate. Snow covered the lower porch steps and gathered against the barn doors. Inside, Evelyn lit every lamp in the living room and opened 2 more bottles of wine. She had invited people over. David's aunt and uncle arrived first, then 2 cousins from Whitefish. Lucas brought a business partner and his wife. By 7, 12 people stood around the dining table, speaking in low voices and pretending they had come only to remember David. The black folder waited beside Evelyn's plate. My suitcase stood near the staircase. She had packed it herself. I came down wearing my coat. Lucas looked at the bag and smiled. "Changing your mind?" "No." Evelyn rested one hand on the folder. "Then perhaps having witnesses will help." She pushed the waiver toward me. A notary stamp had appeared at the bottom. The signature space was marked with a yellow tab. Martin Shaw was not there. That told me he had begun asking questions. Evelyn tapped the paper. "Sign it, Claire." "No." Her guests shifted around the table. No one asked what the document said. Evelyn had already given them a version in which I was the difficult widow, holding a grieving family hostage over a technicality. Lucas folded his arms. "You heard her. She's refusing to release the house." I looked at him. "There is nothing for me to release." Evelyn's patience broke first. She pulled the document back and turned toward the others. "My son gave this woman everything. His insurance, his pension, his name, and now she has returned to interfere with the one home his mother has left." David's aunt glanced at me. "Claire, surely this can be resolved without lawyers." "It could have been." Evelyn laughed once. "Listen to her. She appears once a year and speaks as though she owns the mountain." I felt the envelope inside my coat. Helen had told me not to discuss the trust without her present. Not because I needed permission. Because every sentence mattered now. "I asked you not to sell the land," I said. "You do not get to ask. I warned you the contract contained false information. My son wanted this house to stay with his family." "Did David ever tell you he owned it?" Her expression sharpened. "He did not have to. That was not my question." Lucas moved between us. "Stop twisting her words. I'm asking for one fact." Evelyn picked up my suitcase. She carried it toward the front door with surprising strength. One of David's sweaters slipped from the side pocket and fell onto the floor. I bent to retrieve it. She reached the door first. Cold air entered the hallway as she pulled it open. Snow spun beneath the porch light. "You are not spending another night under my roof," she said. I straightened slowly. Several people looked away. No one stopped her. Evelyn threw the suitcase onto the porch. It struck the railing, opened, and spilled clothing across the steps. The sound of the deadbolt turning reached something old inside me. For half a second, the hallway was gone. I was standing beside a steel security door overseas, listening to an alarm pulse through concrete walls while someone shouted coordinates I could no longer remember. My hands went numb. Then I looked at David's sweater lying across the snow. The memory released me. Evelyn stood behind the glass. "This house belongs to the Rowan family," she said. "You stopped being family when my son died." I should have argued. Instead, I looked beyond her toward the orange survey stakes beneath the trees. Their ribbons snapped in the wind. Headlights appeared at the gate. A black SUV moved slowly through the snow and stopped near the porch. Helen Park stepped out carrying a leather case. Colonel Samuel Pierce came around the passenger side. His silver hair was wet with snow, but his posture had not changed since the last time I saw him at Fort Lewis. He looked at the suitcase. Then at me. Recognition passed across his face. He straightened. "Major Rowan." The title carried through the open doorway. Lucas stopped smiling. Colonel Pierce had commanded the engineering brigade during my final deployment. He had signed my retirement recommendation and later witnessed the conservation amendment because he understood the emergency access plan better than anyone outside our unit. Evelyn looked at him. "You know, Claire?" Pierce did not take his eyes from me. "I know Major Rowan's work." "I'm not a major anymore, sir," I said. "You earned the rank. Retirement did not erase it." Helen climbed the porch steps and studied the scattered clothing. "Claire, did Mrs. Rowan remove you from the residence?" "She did." Helen turned toward Evelyn. "Mrs. Rowan, did you just remove the legal trustee from property held under her trust?" Evelyn gripped the doorframe. "This is my son's house." Helen opened her case. "No, it was your son's home. Those are not legally the same thing." She stepped inside only after I nodded. Everyone moved back toward the dining room. Helen laid 3 documents on the table. The first was the recorded deed. The second was the Rowan Ridge Conservation Trust. The third was David's lifetime residential agreement. She pointed to the date on the deed. This land was transferred into trust 12 years before David Rowan's death. Claire Rowan is the settler, primary beneficiary, and acting trustee. Lucas shook his head. David lived here. Yes, Helen said, under a lifetime residential right granted by his wife. Evelyn stared at the pages. He was her husband. That did not alter the title. He left everything to me. Helen placed David's will beside the trust. He left you his personal savings, his truck, family possessions, and the contents of a separate investment account. He could not bequeath land he did not own. Lucas reached for the deed. Colonel Pierce placed 2 fingers on the page before Lucas could lift it. Read it where it lies. Lucas withdrew his hand. Helen continued. The proposed purchase agreement identifies Mrs. Evelyn Rowan as the sole owner of 286 acres. That statement is false. The seller's disclosure also claims there are no conservation restrictions. That is false as well. Martin's name appeared at the bottom of the preliminary contract. Beside it was Evelyn's signature. David's uncle frowned. Evelyn, you signed this? She did not answer. Lucas looked at his mother. You said the title was clear. You told me your lawyer checked it. I said Martin's company would handle the paperwork. You said we had a buyer. Their voices began to rise. The alliance between them lasted less than a minute once the money disappeared. Helen waited. She did not interrupt. When they finally stopped, she removed one more document. This is the temporary occupancy agreement Claire executed after David's death. It allowed you to remain here without rent while you arranged permanent housing. Evelyn looked at me. You told me I could stay. I did. You never said it was temporary. The agreement says it 3 times. You knew I was grieving. So was I. The words came out without force. That made her look at me more carefully. Helen turned to the final page. The agreement also terminates immediately in the event of attempted sale, fraudulent representation, or unauthorized construction. Lucas stared at the orange stakes through the window. What happens now? Helen closed the folder. The development contract is void. Shaw Mountain has withdrawn its offer pending legal review. Any deposit obtained through false representations may have to be returned. The survey crews will leave once the weather permits. And the house? Evelyn asked. That decision belongs to Claire. Every face turned toward me. It was the moment they had expected me to enjoy. I did not. Victory did not feel like triumph. It felt like finally setting down something heavy. Helen reached into her case once more. There is another item. She held out a sealed envelope bearing David's handwriting. Evelyn recognized it immediately. Her face changed. Where did you get that? David left it with my office, Helen said. It was to be opened only if you attempted to sell or encumber the property. Evelyn looked at me. You knew about this? I knew he left instructions. I did not know what he wrote. Helen offered me the envelope. I did not take it. It's addressed to her. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she broke the seal. She read the first lines silently. Then she stopped. Lucas leaned closer. What does it say? She folded the paper. Helen's voice remained calm. Mrs. Rowan, the letter must be entered into the record. Please continue. Evelyn looked toward the window. When she spoke, her voice had lost its command. David wrote that the ridge always belonged to Claire. No one moved. She read again. He asked her to let me stay because he was afraid I would be alone. Her mouth tightened around the next sentence. He wrote, her silence is not permission. It is the last kindness I asked from her. The paper lowered in her hands. For 2 years, Evelyn had treated my restraint as proof that she was right. Now she understood it had been a promise. Not to her. To her son. I looked at David's handwriting across the page. I kept that promise, I said. Even after you removed our photographs. Even after you called the land yours. Even after you used the months I missed as proof that I did not love him. Evelyn whispered. You left him. Yes. The answer surprised her. I continued, before she could use it against me again. I left because my unit was deployed. I returned because he asked me to, and I have punished myself for every day I was gone. My voice remained steady, but my hands did not. Colonel Pierce noticed. He said nothing. That was another kind of respect. I thought tolerating you was part of loving David, I said. I thought if I carried enough guilt, it would prove that losing him had changed me. Evelyn held the letter against her chest. I was his mother, and I was his wife. Neither of us owned his grief. Neither of us owns the other. Outside, snow struck the windows in soft bursts. I looked around the table at the people who had watched my suitcase land in the snow. Then I looked at Evelyn. I kept my promise to David. I placed the occupancy termination notice beside her hand. You used that promise as a weapon. This time, no one looked away. Evelyn looked down at the termination notice. For the first time since I had known her, she did not immediately argue. The dining room had gone still in a different way now. Not shocked. Exposed. Lucas was the first to move. He pulled out a chair and sat heavily, staring at the voided development contract as though the numbers might rearrange themselves if he waited long enough. What happens to the deposit? He asked. Helen closed the trust document. That depends on how it was obtained and where the money went. Lucas looked at his mother. Evelyn looked at him. Neither answered. Martin's company had transferred a preliminary payment 6 days earlier. Evelyn had already used part of it to cover one of Lucas's overdue business loans. The rest had gone toward a new vehicle, repairs to the guest wing, and legal fees for documents no licensed attorney had actually prepared. Their plan had not collapsed because I had taken anything from them. It collapsed because they had begun spending money from land they did not own. David's aunt stepped toward Evelyn. You told us Claire was trying to claim the house. She is, Evelyn said automatically. Helen shook her head. Claire did not file a claim. She already held legal title. The distinction landed harder than any accusation could have. I picked up David's sweater from the floor and folded it over my arm. Evelyn watched me. You're throwing me out now. It was not a question. Everyone waited for my answer. I could have told her to pack immediately. The occupancy agreement allowed it. The storm had closed the highway, but there were hotels in town and enough people in that room to give her a bed. For one brief moment, I imagined carrying her suitcase to the porch. I imagined turning the deadbolt while she stood beneath the same snow. The thought gave me no satisfaction. Only exhaustion. You have 45 days, I said. Lucas looked up. Helen did not react, but I saw her make a note. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. You expect me to find another home in 45 days? I expect you to begin. My son lived here. So did I. You were barely here. I took a breath. That sentence once would have pulled me back into apology. It did not anymore. You will communicate through Helen from now on. You will not contact a buyer, surveyor, or contractor. You will not remove anything that belonged to David unless it is specifically listed in his will. Evelyn held the letter tighter. And if I refuse? Then the 45 days become much shorter. The words were quiet. She understood them. Colonel Pierce helped me gather the clothes from the porch while Helen spoke privately with Martin by phone. The storm had worsened, so Pierce drove me to a small lodge near the county road. Before I left, Evelyn stood beside the staircase. Her hand rested on the railing David had rebuilt after our first winter. Claire. I stopped. She looked as though she wanted to apologize, but what came out was different. I took care of him when you couldn't. The old guilt rose. Not as a wave this time. More like a door opening onto a room I no longer had to enter. You did, I said. And I will always be grateful for that. Her shoulders lowered slightly. Then I continued. But gratitude is not ownership. I walked out before she could answer. The investigation that followed was quieter than the dinner. Shaw Mountain Development withdrew completely. Their attorneys demanded repayment of the preliminary deposit and submitted the false seller's disclosure to the county. Lucas's business partner left within a week. The loans remained. The promised resort money did not. Helen advised me to pursue a fraud complaint. I agreed to cooperate with any official inquiry, but I did not ask her to make Evelyn suffer for me. There was a difference between consequences and revenge. I was only beginning to understand it. Evelyn moved into a condominium in Kalispell 39 days later. She took David's truck, his mother's pearls, and the family furniture listed in his will. She left the burgundy curtains. Lucas cleared his equipment from the barn under the supervision of a county officer and one of Helen's assistants. He did not speak to me. I did not need him to. The house stood empty for almost 3 months. I returned in April. Snow still covered the shaded side of the ridge, but the creek had begun moving again beneath the ice. The first night, I slept in David's old office because I could not yet bring myself to enter our bedroom. The second night, I opened every curtain. By the end of the week, I had rehung our wedding photograph over the mantel. I did not restore the house exactly as it had been. That surprised me. For years, I had believed healing meant preserving every object in the place David left it. But a home could not remain a memorial forever. It had to become somewhere the living were allowed to breathe. With Helen's help, I created a small nonprofit program using the detached guest house and workshop. It offered short winter stays for women leaving military service, widows navigating estate disputes, and veterans who needed somewhere quiet before deciding what came next. I called it Cold Water House. Colonel Pierce joined the advisory board, though he warned me that the title sounded more like a weather station than a retreat. I told him that was intentional. The first guest was a former Army medic named Tessa, who slept with the hallway light on and apologized every morning for doing so. I never told her to turn it off. Some nights we drank coffee on the back steps without speaking. That was enough. 6 months after the dinner, a letter arrived from Evelyn. There was no lawyer's name on the envelope. No demand. No accusation. She wrote that she had spent 2 years believing grief gave her the right to decide who loved David more. She admitted that she had seen my silence as weakness, because accepting it as kindness would have forced her to examine what she was doing. At the bottom, she asked whether she could visit his grave on his birthday. I wrote back with the cemetery time. I did not invite her to the house. Forgiveness did not require returning the keys. We stood 10 feet apart beside David's grave that June. Evelyn placed white flowers near the stone. I brought coffee in the chip travel mug he used on long drives. Neither of us apologized for crying. When we left, she walked toward her car, and I walked toward mine. It was not reconciliation, but it was honest. A year after the night she threw me out, snow returned to Rowan Ridge. I stood in the living room while Tessa helped another guest carry blankets into the upstairs room. The burgundy curtains were gone. In their place hung simple white fabric that moved whenever the heat came on. Outside, snow gathered along the porch railing. It covered the place where my suitcase had opened. I locked the front door before bed. The deadbolt made the same sharp sound. This time, I did not freeze. I rested my hand against the wood, listened to the house settle around me, and turned off the light. For a long time, I believed strength meant enduring what other people placed on my shoulders. Grief, blame, silence. I thought the strongest person in the room was the one who could absorb the most pain without becoming difficult. I was wrong. Endurance without boundaries does not always protect peace. Sometimes, it only teaches people that they can keep taking from you. The deed did not give me value. Colonel Pierce calling me Major did not restore it. Helen opening the trust documents did not create a truth that had been missing. My worth existed before anyone at that table recognized it. The papers only made it impossible for them to deny. I also learned that forgiveness is not the same as reopening every door. You can release anger and still keep the key. You can understand someone's grief without allowing them to use it against you. And you can love the memory of someone without disappearing inside the promises you made to them. Peace is not always found by avoiding conflict. Sometimes, it begins when you stop abandoning yourself. That winter, the snow kept falling over Rowan Ridge. But inside the house, the curtains were open. And so was I. If you have ever stayed quiet because you thought keeping the peace was the same as keeping a family together, I hope Claire's story reminds you of something important. Kindness should never require you to disappear. Forgiveness does not mean handing your keys back to someone who once used them to lock you out. Share this story with someone who may need the reminder that quiet strength is still strength, even when no one recognizes it at first. Thank you for spending this time with me.